My husband pleaded for me not to attend his law school graduation. Why this? I questioned. He scoffed. I don't want them to discover you're simply a server. With coldness he stated, I'll say that you are dead. Do not contact me again. I departed weeping. Years later, on his nuptial day, my phone refused to stop ringing. His mother, his new wife, all demanded what transpired. Can you imagine the man you sacrificed everything for, the man you literally bled for, looking you dead in the eye just 2 weeks before his graduation and telling you, don't come. I don't want people knowing you're just a waitress. Just a waitress. That's how it all came crashing down, a betrayal so cold and calculated it still makes my stomach knot up when I think about it. But how did I get to that moment? How did I, Haley, become an embarrassment? Let me take you back to where the story really begins. For 6 years, my life revolved around Riverside Diner, a place that perpetually smelled of bacon grease and coffee that had been on the burner a little too long. The vinyl booths were a patchwork of duct tape, the jukebox stuck on an endless loop of 70s classics. The fluorescent lights flickered whenever it rained, which, where I live, meant almost every day. But this diner, this was my kingdom. I knew every chipped tile, every wobbly table, every squeaky kitchen door. I knew which coffee pot dripped and which one poured true. And more than the place itself, I knew the people. I knew Professor Hicks, who came in at 7:15 sharp for black coffee and 2 sugars, leaving a neatly folded $2 tip in the third booth. I knew the lost university students who'd camp out for hours, debating constitutional law and criminal procedure, their textbooks and laptops spread like empires. They talk about tort reform and appellate briefs, gesturing with highlighters, oblivious to the woman refilling their waters. To them, I was invisible, just part of the furniture, as permanent and unseen as the chipped formica. They never even learned my name, though it was right there on my name tag. My coworkers became my family. Maria, who could spot a bad tipper or a potential problem customer the moment they walked in, taught me to handle rudeness with a smile that never quite reached my eyes. Devin, scrubbing pots in the back, working his way through community college, shared his wisdom. Every job teaches you something valuable if you pay attention. And washing dishes, that teaches patience, and the satisfaction of turning chaos into order. He always said the people who looked down on service work just had no idea how much skill and endurance it required. And then there was old Joe, our cook for 30 years. He rarely spoke, communicating mostly in grunts, but he saw everything. If I came in with red eyes or moving slow, an extra slice of pie would slide across the counter. No words, just an understanding that sometimes kindness comes in the form of banana cream and silence. The work was exhausting, a bone-deep ache that Epsom salts couldn't touch. My feet bled sometimes, blisters bursting in my shoes. My hands always smelled like coffee, no matter how hard I scrubbed. I learned to swallow anger when customers snapped their fingers or called me sweetheart, in a tone that made it an insult. But there was a dignity to this work, a value the outside world refused to acknowledge because it measured worth in degrees and salary, not reliability or honest effort. I showed up, on time, every single shift. I took pride in making sure coffee cups stayed full, orders came out right, and customers left satisfied, even if they never bothered to learn my name. Then 3 years ago, Samuel Thornton walked into my diner. It was late on a Tuesday, finals week. He looked utterly exhausted, hunched over law textbooks, counting change to see if he could afford coffee and food. Something about him reminded me of my younger brother. So I brought him coffee and a grilled cheese, telling him it was a mistake order that would go to waste. I paid for it myself, out of my tips, but I couldn't stand seeing someone go hungry while studying. He looked at me with this genuine gratitude, and we started talking. He told me about law school, the insane pressure, the fear he wasn't connected enough to make it. I told him about the diner, the strange satisfaction of making someone's day a little better. We talked until my shift ended, and he walked me to the bus stop, completely out of his way. Within a month, we were dating. He'd come to the diner on my breaks, and we'd sit in that back booth dreaming. He made me laugh with stories about his professors. I made him feel grounded, he said, like there was a life outside the law school pressure cooker. 6 months later, we were married at the courthouse. No big wedding, no fancy dinner. Just us, Maria, and Devin as witnesses. We were young, in love, convinced our feelings could overcome anything. Those early months of marriage felt like a true partnership. We lived in a cramped apartment above a laundromat, furniture from thrift stores, dishes mismatched. Our bed frame was held together with duct tape and optimism. But it was ours. Samuel would study late while I soaked my aching feet after double shifts. We'd fall asleep tangled together, too tired to make it to the bedroom, whispering about the future we'd build once he graduated. He talked about using his education to help people, not just accumulate wealth. I believed him. I wanted to believe that we shared the same values, that we understood what it meant to work hard for something meaningful. I supported him in every way I knew how. When his student loans were delayed and rent was due, I covered it with my tip money I'd been saving for new work shoes. I wore my old ones for another 6 months, even though the soles were worn through and my socks got wet when it rained. When he needed expensive textbooks and bar prep materials, I picked up extra shifts, going without new clothes for over a year. My winter coat zipper broke, but his study materials arrived on time. When exams stressed him out, I kept the apartment quiet, worked evening shifts so he could study uninterrupted. I bought his favorite foods, even when money was tight, because I thought small comforts mattered. I believed I was investing in our future, that his success would be our success. We were a team. I can see now how wrong I was. The shift in how Samuel treated me started so gradually. Around his second year of law school, things began to change. He stopped introducing me as his wife at law school events. We'd arrive, and when his classmates asked who I was, he'd just say, "This is Haley." No context. No explanation. At first, I thought maybe he just assumed they knew. But then I noticed how he'd immediately change the subject, steering conversations away from us. If someone asked what I did, he'd jump in before I could even open my mouth, saying something vague about boring day jobs versus legal theory. He even stopped inviting me to study group gatherings at our apartment, scheduling them during my diner shifts. When I offered to change my hours, he just said, "It's fine, you'd probably be bored anyway." I accepted it. I wanted to believe it, because the alternative, that was too painful to acknowledge. Then, one evening, I found out the ugly truth. I'd gone to the law library to drop off the lunch he'd forgotten. I overheard him talking with 2 classmates. One of them asked if he was doing anything with his girlfriend that weekend. Samuel laughed. "Nah, just studying. Don't have time for a relationship with law school." I stood frozen in the doorway, invisible, holding his forgotten lunch, listening to him pretend I didn't exist. I confronted him that night, my voice shaking. He just said I'd misunderstood. That he meant he didn't have time for the kind of relationship other people had, with regular date nights and weekend trips. He was under enormous pressure, he said, and couldn't worry about how he phrased things. I let it go. I wanted peace more than truth. But the erasure continued. It intensified. He stopped posting pictures of us on social media. His Instagram, his Facebook, they became curated showcases of a serious, dedicated student with no distractions. When I asked why, he said social media was superficial, and he needed to maintain a professional image for future employers. He stopped mentioning me to professors or at networking events. I found this out when his classmates would occasionally come into the diner, and when I mentioned being Samuel's wife, they'd look confused or say, "Oh, I didn't know he was married." Each time, something inside me cracked a little further. I told myself he was stressed, that law school was getting to him, that things would get better. I made excuses for behavior that needed no excuse, only acknowledgement. But deep down, something cold and certain was growing in my chest. This knowledge that I was becoming invisible in my own marriage, that my husband was systematically erasing me from his life while I was still living in it. Now, standing in our apartment, Samuel's words still echoing. "Don't come to my graduation. I don't want people knowing you're just a waitress." The erasure was complete. I wasn't just invisible. According to Samuel, I wasn't supposed to exist at all. The waitress who worked until her feet bled, who sacrificed her own dreams for his education. That woman was an embarrassment he needed to hide. "Just a waitress," I whispered again, the words feeling like ashes. Samuel stood up, pocketing his phone. "I'm glad you understand. The ceremony is invitation only anyway, so it's not like you were really going to be able to attend." That was a lie. Family members were welcome. But I didn't argue. What was the point? He'd already decided I wasn't family. He'd already decided I wasn't worthy of being seen with him on his big day. I need to get back to studying, he said, walking towards our bedroom. He paused, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Oh, and Haley? I've been telling people you died a few years ago. So if anyone ever asks, just don't contact me. It's cleaner that way. He closed the bedroom door. The click of the latch echoed in the sudden silence. I stood there, a Thursday night meatloaf getting cold on the coffee table, my entire world collapsing around me. I stood frozen, staring at that closed bedroom door. The meatloaf on the coffee table had stopped steaming. The apartment felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in. He'd just told me he'd been informing people I was dead, and then he walked away to study, as if he'd simply mentioned a change in his class schedule. My legs felt weak, so I sank onto the couch, where moments ago he delivered his verdict. I pressed my palm against the worn fabric, feeling nothing but dead springs. I needed to understand. How do you tell people your wife is dead while she's still making your meals and paying half the rent? I walked to the bedroom door, knocking softly at first, then harder. Samuel, we need to finish this conversation. There's nothing to finish. His voice was muffled but clear. I have a contracts exam on Monday. I need to study. I opened the door anyway. He sat at the small desk we bought together, his laptop open, textbooks neatly stacked. He didn't turn around. You can't just tell me you've been pretending I'm dead and then go study for an exam. He sighed, that infuriating exhale that suggested I was being unreasonable. Haley, I already explained this. Everyone at graduation will be from families that matter. Lawyers, judges, business owners. These are people who can help my career. Having them meet you would raise questions about my judgment. My judgment, I repeated, the words foreign in my mouth. What exactly would they question? That you married someone who works hard? Someone who supported you through school? He finally turned, his expression devoid of warmth, no recognition of the person I'd been to him for 3 years. They would question why I married someone who serves pancakes for a living, why I chose someone with no education, no prospects, no connections that could benefit me professionally. Each word landed with brutal precision. This wasn't spontaneous cruelty. This was rehearsed, deliberate. I helped pay for your degree, I said, hating how my voice shook. I worked double shifts so you could afford textbooks, bar prep. I covered rent when your loans were delayed. I sacrificed so you could focus. And I appreciate that, Samuel said, in the tone people use when they don't appreciate something at all. But appreciation doesn't change reality. The legal profession is about connections and image. I can't build the career I want while being associated with someone whose greatest accomplishment is remembering how people take their coffee. The casual dismissal of my entire existence burned worse than outright hatred. Hatred at least acknowledges that someone matters enough to inspire strong feeling. This was colder. A calculation. I had served my purpose, and now I was a liability to be eliminated. So, you told people I died, I stated, needing to hear it again, to make it real. Yes. He turned back to his laptop, already done with me. When people asked about family or my personal life, I told them my wife passed away a few years ago in an accident. It was the simplest explanation. Simplest for who? For everyone. He clicked something on his screen. It generated sympathy, which helped in some situations. Explained why no one had met you. And it avoided awkward questions about why I was married to someone inappropriate for my social circle. Inappropriate. 3 years of marriage reduced to that single adjective. It meant I wasn't good enough, had never been good enough, would never be good enough. No matter what I sacrificed. When did you start telling people this? My voice sounded distant. Around the middle of second year, he said, casually, like discussing a new study method. That's when networking became more important and people started asking more personal questions. Second year. That was 18 months ago. For 18 months, Samuel had been walking through the world as a widower. While I served coffee and cleared plates to pay our bills. While I ate from double shifts so he could study without financial stress. Does anyone know the truth? I asked. Does anyone in your entire law school world know I exist? He hesitated. That pause told me everything. A few people from first year met you briefly, but most of them transferred or we lost touch. No one who matters knows you are real. No one who matters knows you are real. The sentence was so absurd, I almost laughed. I was standing right here, breathing, speaking, existing. But according to Samuel, I wasn't real because the people who could advance his career didn't know about me. This is insane, I said. You understand that, right? This is not normal behavior. Normal is relative. He closed his laptop and finally gave me his full attention, which somehow made it worse. In my world, having the right connections and maintaining the right image is normal. Essential, actually. You come from a different world where those things don't matter. But in my profession, they matter more than almost anything else. More than honesty. More than the person who supported you through school. Yes, he said, without hesitation, without shame. More than those things. I need you to understand something, Haley. I'm going to be successful. I'm going to build the kind of career most people only dream about. And I cannot do that while dragging around someone who represents everything I'm trying to move beyond. Everything you're trying to move beyond? I echoed. You mean poverty? Working class jobs? The kind of life I live? Yes, exactly that. He stood up, and I noticed he was taller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just shrunk. I grew up poor, Haley. I know what it's like to be looked down on, to be dismissed because you don't have the right background. I worked incredibly hard to get into law school, and I am not going to waste that opportunity by staying connected to a life that will hold me back. I am not a life. I am a person. I am your wife. Not for much longer. He walked past me, pulling a duffel bag from the closet. I think it would be better if you stayed somewhere else tonight. I need to focus on studying, and this conversation is not productive. I watched him pack my clothes, just grabbing random items and shoving them into the bag. My favorite sweater, the jeans from our first date, a dress I'd bought for a law school formal he'd uninvited me to at the last minute. Samuel, we need to talk about this properly. You can't just erase someone from your life. He zipped the bag and held it out to me. I already have, and I need you to accept that and move on. Don't come to graduation. Don't contact me at school or at work. If anyone ever asks, tell them we were never married. Tell them you have me confused with someone else. Just stay away. What about the apartment? What about our things? I'll handle the apartment. Take what you need tonight, and I'll have the rest sent wherever you end up. He pulled out his phone. I'm texting you my sister's address. You can stay there tonight if you need to. Your sister knows about this. Emma knows we're separating. She doesn't need to know the details. He set the duffel bag at my feet, like dismissing a servant. I'm going to continue studying now. Please be gone when I come back out. He walked back into the bedroom. I heard the lock click. I stood there, holding the duffel bag, looking around the apartment we'd shared for 3 years. The second-hand couch where we used to fall asleep. The coffee table where his cold meatloaf now sat. The kitchen where I'd made countless meals while he studied. The bathroom where I'd soaked my bleeding feet. None of it had ever been ours. It had been his, and I had just been borrowing space in it until he decided I was no longer useful. I picked up my phone and called my sister Emma. She answered on the second ring. Can you come get me? My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I need somewhere to stay tonight. Emma didn't ask questions. She just said she'd be there in 20 minutes and told me to wait outside. I grabbed the duffel bag Samuel had packed and walked out, without looking back. The hallway smelled like garlic and tomatoes, normal life continuing normally for people whose worlds weren't collapsing. I waited on the front steps, the evening air cool. I hadn't thought to grab a jacket. Cars passed. People walked by with shopping bags, heading home to lives that made sense. I sat there, feeling hollowed out, like someone had scooped out everything that made me human, leaving just a shell. Emma pulled up in her old Honda. I climbed into the passenger seat. She looked at me, at the duffel bag, at my face that must have shown everything. What happened? She asked quietly. He told people I died, I said. And then he told me to leave. Emma reached over and squeezed my hand. She didn't say anything else. She just drove, and I watched the city lights blur, thinking about how you can be alive and dead at the same time. How you can exist and not exist, depending on who's telling the story. At Emma's apartment, her guest room was small but clean. She brought me tea I didn't drink and sat with me while I stared at the wall. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked eventually. I shook my head. Talking required energy I didn't have. Explanations for things I didn't understand myself. "Okay," she said. "I'll be in the next room if you need anything." Anything at all. After she left, I lay on the bed, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere across town, Samuel was studying for his contracts exam. Probably relieved to have me gone. Probably planning how to maintain his fiction of being a tragic widower. And I was here, officially erased, but inconveniently still breathing, trying to figure out how to exist in a world where the person who promised to love me had decided I was better off dead. 3 weeks later, the divorce papers arrived. Slid under Emma's door in a manila envelope, no return address. I found them on a Tuesday morning. Grief had changed in those 3 weeks, hardening into something clearer, more solid. The papers inside were exactly what I expected. Petition for dissolution of marriage, irreconcilable differences due to lifestyle disparity. That bloodless legal phrase reduced 3 years of my life to a bureaucratic checkbox, as though the violence of being erased could be captured in standardized court documents. I signed them that afternoon with a pen Emma kept in a drawer full of batteries. My signature looked small, unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone I used to know. I mailed the papers back that same day, standing at the post office counter. The clerk asked if I wanted tracking. I said no. There was nothing inside worth tracking. Within a week, I'd moved into a studio apartment above a used bookstore on Maple Street. The rent was cheaper. My landlord, Mr. Chin, asked no questions. The floor slanted, the radiator clanked, but the windows faced east. Every morning, the sunrise painted the walls in gold and pink, making it feel less like an ending and more like a beginning. I furnished it slowly, with pieces from thrift stores, mismatched dishes from Goodwill. Plants for the windowsill that I kept alive through sheer determination, as though their survival was connected to my own. Each purchase felt like reclaiming territory, building something that belonged only to me. I returned to work at Riverside Diner the Monday after I signed the divorce papers. Walking through that door felt both familiar and strange. Maria was wiping down the counter. She looked up, no pity, just solid understanding. "You back for good?" she asked. "Yeah, I am back." She nodded, handing me a clean apron. "Table 6 needs coffee, and the couple at the window booth are ready to order." That was it. No intrusive questions. Just the routine of work, requiring my attention, giving me something concrete to do. I tied the apron and picked up the coffee pot. And for the first time in weeks, I felt steady. Maria noticed the dark circles under my eyes, but she never pressed. She just made sure I ate during my breaks, appearing with toast or soup. If I needed a moment in the bathroom, she covered my tables without comment. Her kindness was practical, unobtrusive. Devin, scrubbing pots on the weekend, had this way of talking while he worked. "You know what I figured out about dishes," he said. "Every single one starts out dirty. Food stuck on, grease baked on, stains that look permanent. But if you just keep working at it, keep scrubbing, eventually it comes clean. Nothing stays ruined forever if you put in the work." I looked at him, this 20-year-old kid, and realized he understood more about resilience than most people twice his age. "That's a good philosophy," I said. He grinned. "Yeah, well, dishes teach you things if you pay attention. Patience, mostly. And the fact that a fresh start is always possible." Old Joe started making my favorite comfort foods without being asked. He'd slide a plate of grilled cheese and tomato soup across the counter, catching my eye with a gruff nod. Sometimes it was his special mac and cheese, the kind he only made when someone needed it. These people saw me. They valued my work, my presence, in ways that had nothing to do with who I was married to or what credentials I held. They measured worth differently than Samuel's world did. In reliability, in kindness, in the small daily acts that kept the diner running. For the first time in years, I felt visible. And that visibility was healing in ways I hadn't expected. Emma checked in regularly. She'd show up with groceries I hadn't asked for, and wine I definitely needed. She never said, "I told you so," though she had every right. She'd only met Samuel 3 times, and each time she'd come away with observations she mostly kept to herself. He looks at other people at parties like he's shopping, she'd once said carefully, like he's always scanning for someone more interesting or useful. I had defended him then, made excuses. But Emma had been right. Now, she just showed up with takeout, and we'd sit at my wobbling table, watching terrible reality TV. Her sarcastic commentary made me laugh until I cried. And those moments reminded me that not everyone I loved had betrayed me. I developed routines that were entirely mine. Saturday mornings, I walked to the farmer's market. Sunday evenings, I spent in the bookstore downstairs, where Mr. Chin let me browse for hours. I read novels, memoirs about survival. And slowly, I began to understand that my life wasn't over. Just different. The weeks turned into months. Summer faded into fall. I worked my shifts, came home to my small apartment, and built a life that was modest, but honestly mine. I wasn't happy, exactly, but I was stable. And stability felt like an achievement after months of emotional freefall. Then came the morning that changed everything again. It was a Tuesday, 8 months after the divorce. I was working breakfast, moving between tables. 2 law students sat in Samuel's old corner booth. I was only half listening as I approached with a coffee pot. "Did you get your invitation to Samuel Thornton's wedding?" one of them asked. My hand froze, coffee splashing slightly. I set the pot down, pretending to wipe the spill while my heart hammered. "Yeah, it looks like it's going to be huge," the other student replied. "His fiancée's family is apparently spending a fortune. Her dad is that appellate judge, right? Judge Ashford, Victoria Ashford. Can you imagine landing someone like that?" Samuel really upgraded from that tragic backstory he had going. The whole dead wife thing. They laughed. The sound cut through me like broken glass. I finished wiping the table and walked back to the kitchen on legs that felt disconnected. Victoria Ashford, daughter of an appellate judge. Exactly the kind of pedigree Samuel had been cultivating. The exact opposite of a waitress who embarrassed him with her working-class existence. He hadn't just left me. He had upgraded me. Traded authenticity for advantage. Swapped the woman who supported him for someone whose connections could advance his career. And he was getting married, celebrating this new partnership, while still telling people his first wife had died tragically years ago. I finished my shift, moving through the motions automatically. When it ended, I walked home slowly, taking the long route through the park. Back in my apartment, I sat at my wobbling table and stared at my laptop. I hadn't searched for Samuel since the divorce. But now, I needed to know what story he was telling. What version of reality he had constructed around my erasure. I typed his name into the search bar. What I found made something cold and sharp crystallize in my chest. Not jealousy, but a darker form of clarity. Almost like purpose taking shape. Samuel's Instagram profile loaded slowly. The images appeared one by one, like evidence. The first, him at a charity gala, wearing a tailored suit I knew he couldn't have afforded when we were married. Victoria Ashford stood beside him, her hand resting elegantly on his arm. Both smiling with the easy confidence of people who'd never scrubbed floors or counted coins for groceries. I scrolled down. More photos. Samuel at a legal conference, a name tag identifying him as an associate at Morrison, and Wells, a prestigious firm. Samuel and Victoria at a vineyard weekend. Samuel alone in his new office, law books arranged artfully behind him. But it was the captions that made my hands shake. Under the gala photo, he'd written about gratitude for second chances and the importance of honoring those we have lost by living fully. The comments were full of heart emojis, people praising his strength, his resilience. Someone mentioned how inspiring it was to see him finding happiness again after such devastating loss. I clicked an older post, 6 months ago. Samuel alone on a beach, his back to the camera, looking at the ocean. The caption, 3 years ago today, I lost my best friend and partner. The grief never fully leaves, but I have learned that carrying love forward is the greatest tribute we can offer those who shaped us. She would want me to keep building the life we dreamed about together. Over 100 comments. People shared their own stories of loss, thanked him for being vulnerable. One comment, from a partner at his law firm, said his resilience in the face of personal tragedy was what made him such a valuable member of their team. Something cold settled in my chest. Samuel hadn't just told a few people I was dead. He had constructed an entire public mythology around my fictional death, complete with anniversary posts and philosophical reflections on grief and growth. My erasure had become performance art, carefully staged and widely applauded. I opened a new tab and searched for Samuel's name and the law school. The third result was an article from the Alumni magazine, published 4 months ago. Rising Star: How Personal Tragedy Shaped One Graduate's Approach to Justice. My finger hesitated before I clicked. The article opened with a photo of Samuel in his office. It began with his remarkable journey through law school, balancing academic excellence with the emotional weight of losing his spouse during his first year. I read slowly, my pulse accelerating. Samuel described our marriage as a beautiful but brief chapter, a partnership cut short by circumstances he preferred not to detail out of respect for her memory. He talked about how the loss had taught him about life's fragility and the importance of fighting for justice. He said his late wife had always believed in helping others, and her memory motivated him to pursue civil rights law. None of it was true. Samuel had never expressed interest in civil rights law. He talked constantly about money, and I'd never shared any particular philosophy beyond basic human decency. But the interviewer had eaten it up. The article included a quote from one of his professors, saying Samuel's ability to channel personal tragedy into professional drive made him exactly the kind of attorney the legal system needed. A senior partner at Morrison, and Wells mentioned being impressed not just by his credentials, but by his character, tested and proven through unimaginable loss. I clicked back to his Instagram. More posts, stretching back 2 years, each one meticulously maintaining the fiction. A photograph of a book about grief. A 5K with a caption about processing emotional pain. A sunset with a quote about carrying memories forward while building new dreams. The performance was meticulous. He had created an entire digital memorial to a version of me that had never existed. A saintly dead wife whose loss made him more sympathetic, more admirable, more hireable. Every post generated dozens of supportive comments. Every public display of grief earned him social capital that translated directly into professional opportunities. Then I found the engagement announcement. 2 months ago. On both his profile and Victoria's. A photograph of them on what looked like a yacht, Victoria's hand prominently displaying a ring that probably cost more than I made in 6 months. The caption talked about finding love again after loss, about being grateful for second chances, about honoring the past while embracing the future. Victoria's parents commented. Samuel's colleagues wrote supportive messages. Friends shared their happiness. And threaded through all of it was this underlying narrative of the tragic widower who had suffered, healed, and now deserved his happy ending. I clicked on Victoria's profile. Equally curated. Charity events, gallery openings, weekend trips to places I'd only seen in magazines. She was beautiful, polished, poised. Her bio mentioned her work at a nonprofit, her passion for criminal justice reform. Several posts about Samuel, each glowing with affection. In one, she wrote about how his strength in the face of tragedy had inspired her to live more fully. In another, she mentioned how honored she felt to be chosen by someone who understood love's preciousness because he had lost it once before. She had no idea. Victoria Ashford, daughter of an appellate judge, dedicated to justice and reform, had no idea she was marrying a man who had casually erased his living wife from existence because she embarrassed him. She thought she was getting the grieving widower who had transformed pain into purpose. She had no idea she was getting the man who had told me I was better off dead than sitting in his graduation audience. I closed the laptop. The radiator clanked. Outside, traffic, distant voices, the normal sounds of a city evening. My hands had stopped shaking, replaced by a strange calm. Almost detached. Samuel hadn't just told a convenient lie. He had built an entire professional identity on the foundation of my fictional death. Every connection he had made, every job opportunity, every expression of sympathy and admiration, all of it was contaminated by this fundamental deception. He had weaponized my erasure, turning it into social capital. The unfairness was staggering. I had given him 3 years of marriage, 3 years of friendship and support before that. I had worked until my feet bled, so he could study. I had sacrificed my own financial security, my own dreams. And he had repaid me by killing me off and using my corpse as a stepping stone to success. But what struck me most wasn't just what he had done to me. It was what he was doing to everyone else. Victoria thought she was marrying someone honest. His colleagues thought they were elevating someone whose character had been tested by tragedy. His clients would trust him because they believed his personal suffering made him compassionate. All of them were being deceived. And none of them knew it. I stood up and walked to the window. Some lies are too big to let stand unchallenged. Some betrayals demand a response. Not because revenge will heal anything, but because silence becomes complicity. I thought about Victoria walking down the aisle toward a man she didn't really know. I thought about Samuel's colleagues trusting him based on a foundation of fiction. I thought about all the people who would attend his wedding next weekend and celebrate him without understanding what kind of person they were applauding. This wasn't about making Samuel suffer, though I won't pretend that thought held no appeal. This was about refusing to stay dead. This was about resurrecting the truth, just enough to crack the carefully polished surface he had spent months building. This was about giving Victoria and everyone else in Samuel's fabricated world a chance to see who he really was, before they invested any more of their trust and respect in someone who didn't deserve it. I opened my laptop again and created a new email account. Anonymous. Untraceable. Then I started researching. Wedding venues. Guest lists. Contact information for key people in Samuel's professional and personal life. I worked methodically, taking notes in a notebook I bought specifically for this purpose, building a careful architecture of truth that would deploy at exactly the right moment. By the time I finished, it was nearly midnight. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. But I had a plan. And for the first time since Samuel told me not to come to his graduation, I felt something other than grief or confusion or hollow determination. I felt purpose, clear and cold and certain, like ice forming on a winter lake. The notebook sat open on my kitchen table the next morning, filled with names and numbers and details. My coffee had gone cold while I worked, but I barely noticed. I was building something precise, a structure of truth that would stand on its own without requiring me to be its visible architect. Victoria's social media had provided the wedding venue, Ashford Estate, though its official name was Riverside Manor, an upscale property 30 miles outside the city with manicured gardens and crystal chandeliers. She had tagged the location in multiple posts, hashtagging it with their wedding date and variations of blessed and grateful and forever. I spent Tuesday morning cross-referencing social media tags and law firm directories, mapping out who would be present. Victoria's parents were easy to identify. Samuel's law firm partners, too. By Wednesday afternoon, I had a spreadsheet mapping relationships and contact information for 30 key people who would attend the wedding. Victoria's family office manager, the wedding coordinator at Riverside Manor, the receptionist at Morrison & Wells, Samuel's direct supervisor, Victoria's maid of honor and assistant district attorney. Each name represented a point of contact, a place where truth could be planted and allowed to grow. I made my first call on Thursday morning. My hands were steady as I dialed Riverside Manor. When the wedding coordinator answered with professional cheerfulness, my voice came out calm and pleasant. "Hi, this is Haley Thornton. I'm calling to follow up on some billing details for the Thornton-Ashford wedding this Saturday." There was a brief pause, a signal of confusion. "I'm sorry, could you repeat your name?" "Haley Thornton, Samuel's wife. I just wanted to confirm that the payment arrangements have been finalized correctly." The pause lengthened. I heard shuffling papers, a mouse click. "I'm showing the primary contacts for this event as Samuel Thornton and Victoria Ashford. Are you a member of the wedding party?" "I am his wife," I said again, letting the words sit there. "Is there a problem with the account?" No problem at all. I just need to verify some information. Can you hold for one moment?" I held for 3 minutes. When she came back, her voice had shifted. "I apologize for the confusion. I will need to contact the primary account holder to clarify the contact list. Is there a number where you can be reached?" I gave her my cell and thanked her politely. The seed was planted. The coordinator would call Samuel or Victoria. They would have to explain. They would have to address a question that shouldn't exist if Samuel's story about my death was true. I made the second call Friday morning, to Morrison & Wells. The receptionist answered with practiced efficiency. I asked to speak with Samuel Thornton regarding updates to spouse insurance benefits. "Of course. May I ask who is calling?" "Haley Thornton, his wife." Another pause, shorter, but weighted with uncertainty. Let me transfer you to his extension. The phone rang 4 times, then voicemail. I left a brief message, in the same pleasant tone, asking Samuel to call me back about insurance paperwork that needed his signature. Then I called back and asked the receptionist to leave him a note as well, just to ensure he received the message. "I'll make sure he gets this," she said. "Just to confirm, you said you're his wife?" "Yes, that is correct. Haley Thornton. He should have my number in his contacts." I heard her typing, probably adding a note. This would sit in his inbox, flagged as important. It would require explanation to anyone who saw it. People would ask questions. The fiction Samuel had constructed would develop small cracks. The third call went to Victoria's family office. "Ashford Family Office, this is Jennifer." "Hi, Jennifer, this is Haley Thornton. I'm calling about seating arrangements for the wedding this Saturday. I wanted to confirm where Samuel's wife should be seated during the ceremony." This pause was the longest yet. "I'm sorry, I think there might be some confusion. The seating chart shows Samuel Thornton as a single guest being seated with the groom's party. Are you a +1 who was added late?" "No, I am his wife. We've been married for several years, actually. Is there a problem with the seating arrangements?" "Let me pull up the guest list. Can you spell your last name?" I spelled it. The silence that followed told me exactly what she was finding, nothing at all. "I'm not seeing your name on the guest list," Jennifer said, her professionalism cracking slightly. "And the information we have shows Samuel as unmarried. Are you certain you have the correct wedding? Samuel Thornton and Victoria Ashford, this Saturday at Riverside Manor. That's the wedding I'm asking about." "Yes, that is correct. But I really think there has been some mistake. Let me get your contact information, and I will have someone from the family reach out to you to clarify." I gave her my number and email, thanked her, and ended the call. 3 calls, 3 different sources of confusion, all landing in Samuel's world in the 72 hours before his wedding. Each one required explanation. Each one raised questions that had no good answers. I made 2 more calls that afternoon. One to the florist listed in Victoria's Instagram posts, asking about delivery arrangements and mentioning I was Samuel's wife. One to what appeared to be Victoria's college roommate, leaving a voicemail congratulating her on being in the wedding party and introducing myself as someone who looked forward to meeting her at the ceremony. Each call was brief, professional, and deliberately confusing. I wasn't lying about who I was. I was simply existing in spaces where Samuel had declared me non-existent, speaking truth into a narrative built entirely on fiction. The calls would generate conversations. People would mention them to other people. The confusion would spread like ripples in water, reaching Samuel from multiple directions at once. I knew from 3 years of marriage that Samuel was someone who needed control over every detail of his image. He managed his social media the way other people managed investment portfolios. He carefully curated every interaction, every photograph, every public statement. These small disruptions would create anxiety he couldn't fully address, because addressing them required either maintaining the lie or admitting the truth. And neither option gave him the control he craved. Saturday morning arrived, cool and clear. The kind of October day photographers love for outdoor ceremonies. I woke early and dressed carefully in the navy blue dress I had originally planned to wear to Samuel's law school graduation, the one I had dry cleaned for an occasion I was never allowed to attend. I applied minimal makeup and pulled my hair back. I wanted to look presentable but unremarkable, like someone who belonged in professional spaces without drawing unnecessary attention. I drove to Riverside Manor slowly, taking back roads. The estate appeared at the end of a long driveway lined with oak trees. Workers were already setting up. White chairs arranged on the lawn, floral arrangements, a string quartet setting up. I parked across the street in a small public lot, positioning my car where I had a clear view of the main entrance, but far enough away to avoid notice. I settled into my seat with a bottle of water and a book I'd brought as cover, though I had no intention of reading. Guests began arriving around 11:30. Expensive cars, women in elegant dresses, men in tailored suits. Air kisses and greetings. I watched Victoria's parents arrive, immediately surrounded by people. I watched Samuel's law firm partners. At noon, Victoria arrived, in a white limousine, surrounded by her bridesmaids. Even from across the street, I could see how stunning she looked, how perfectly she fit into this world. This was the woman Samuel had chosen to keep alive in his narrative, the one whose existence enhanced him rather than embarrassed him. Samuel arrived 15 minutes later. Seeing him after 8 months felt stranger than I expected. He looked successful, confident, wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly. Shaking hands, laughing with groomsmen. He looked like someone who had never scrubbed floors or counted change for groceries. Someone who had always belonged in spaces like this. I checked my phone. No calls yet, but that would change soon. The wedding was scheduled to start at 1 o'clock. The confusion I had planted was about to bloom into something larger, something Samuel could not control or contain. And I would watch it unfold from across the street, the dead wife resurrecting herself, just enough to crack the foundation of the beautiful lie he had built. I settled deeper into my seat and waited for the truth to arrive like an uninvited guest. At 12:45, guests began taking their seats. The string quartet transitioned from warming up to playing actual ceremony music, something classical that drifted across the lawn. Samuel appeared from a side entrance and walked toward the altar with his groomsmen, all of them looking calm and composed. Every inch the successful attorney about to marry into one of the most prominent legal families in the state. I watched him take his position beneath the floral arbor, checking his watch, exchanging words with the officiant. Guests settled into their chairs. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. A perfect ceremony for a perfect couple, built on a perfect lie. Then, Samuel's phone rang. Even from my position across the street, I could see him stiffen. He reached into his jacket pocket, glanced at the screen, and I saw his expression shift from irritation to something more. He declined the call, slipping the phone back into his pocket, saying something to the groomsman beside him that looked like an apology. 30 seconds later, it rang again. This time, Samuel's frown deepened. He pulled the phone out, stared at the screen longer, and I watched his jaw tighten. That was his tell. When something was going wrong, but he was trying to maintain control. He declined the call again, but his composure had developed a crack. The phone rang a third time before he could put it away. Samuel stepped back from the altar, holding up one finger to the officiant, asking for a moment. He answered the call, pressing the phone to his ear, his free hand going to his hip. I couldn't hear what was being said, but I could read his body language. The way his shoulders hunched, the sharp gesture he made, the growing tension. Whatever explanation he was trying to give was clearly not satisfying the person on the other end. Guests in the front rows began turning, whispering. The officiant looked uncertain. One of the groomsmen approached Samuel, but Samuel waved him away. Then I saw Victoria's mother stand up. Catherine Ashford had her own phone pressed to her ear, her expression transforming from composed matriarch to someone dealing with a crisis. She walked quickly toward the altar, reaching Samuel just as he was ending his call. She immediately began speaking to him, gesturing at her own phone. I watched Samuel shake his head, trying to explain, but Catherine's expression was shifting from confused to suspicious. She kept pointing at her phone, her voice carrying across the lawn, unmistakably demanding answers. Other guests were checking their phones now. I saw the ripple effect moving through the rows. People pulling out devices, looking at screens, then at each other with confused expressions. The wedding coordinator appeared, practically running across the lawn, her tablet clutched in both hands. She reached Samuel and Catherine, trying to show them something on her screen, her mouth moving rapidly in what looked like an attempt to explain a situation that made no sense. One of Samuel's law firm partners stood up. Richard Morrison, I recognized him from LinkedIn. He made his way to the front with the deliberate stride of someone accustomed to taking charge. When he reached the growing cluster of people, he pulled out his own phone and showed Samuel something on the screen. Samuel's face had gone from irritated to genuinely panicked. His hand ran through his hair, disrupting the careful styling. He was talking rapidly, gesturing with both hands, trying to explain something to multiple people at once. But whatever he was saying was clearly not resolving the confusion, because more people kept approaching with phones and questions. The string quartet had stopped playing. The sudden silence made the chaos at the altar even more noticeable. Guests were standing now, craning their necks, whispering speculation that grew louder. Then I saw Victoria. She emerged from the manor in her wedding dress, surrounded by her bridesmaids. She was supposed to wait for her musical cue, but something had clearly gone wrong with the timing. She took 3 steps onto the lawn before she seemed to register that the ceremony hadn't started, that something was very wrong at the altar where her groom should have been waiting calmly. Victoria gathered her dress and walked quickly toward the cluster of people. Her face shifted from bridal joy to confusion to something harder. As she got closer, I watched her reach Samuel, grab his arm, and pull him slightly away from the others. They stood face to face. Even from across the street, I could see the intensity of whatever conversation was happening. Samuel was trying to calm her, his hands making placating gestures. But Victoria was not having it. She stepped back from him, one hand going to her mouth in a gesture of shock. Her mother moved to her side immediately. Now Samuel was surrounded by the 2 most important women in his fabricated life, both clearly demanding answers he could not provide without destroying everything. Judge Ashford stood up from his seat, his expression grave. He approached the group with the measured pace of someone who knew how to project authority, even in chaos. When he reached Samuel, he said something brief. I watched Samuel's face drain of color. More phones were ringing now. More guests checking messages. The wedding coordinator was frantically typing on her tablet. Samuel's law firm partners had gathered in a small cluster, speaking among themselves, glancing toward the altar with expressions ranging from concern to professionally suspicious. Victoria's hand had dropped from her mouth to her side. She was staring at Samuel with an expression I recognized from my own experience. It was the look of someone watching a person they thought they knew transform into a stranger. Her mother had an arm around her, but Victoria seemed barely aware. I checked the time. 10 minutes had passed since the ceremony was supposed to start. 10 minutes of Samuel's carefully constructed world collapsing under the weight of simple truth. The dead wife calling about billing. The dead wife inquiring about insurance benefits. The dead wife asking about seating arrangements. Each call a small bomb detonating in his fiction, creating confusion that multiplied and spread until it could no longer be contained or explained away. Samuel pulled out his phone again, appearing to make a call himself. Probably trying to reach me, trying to figure out how to stop what was already in motion. But I had turned my phone off hours ago. There was nothing he could say that would put this back together. Judge Ashford was speaking to the officiant now. I could read the body language clearly enough. The ceremony was being delayed indefinitely. The judge turned to address the assembled guests, his voice carrying with the projection of someone trained to command a courtroom. I couldn't hear the exact words, but I saw the reaction. Guests standing, confused conversations erupting, people beginning to gather their belongings. Victoria's bridesmaids had surrounded her in a protective cluster. I watched her turn away from Samuel and walk back toward the manor with her mother in attendance, forming a barrier between her and the man she had been about to marry. Samuel tried to follow, but Judge Ashford put a hand on his shoulder, stopping him. The 2 men stood there, having what looked like a very serious conversation, while the wedding dissolved around them. I had seen enough. The truth had done its work, creating exactly the kind of chaos that could not be smoothed over with explanations or excuses. Samuel would have to choose now, admit he had lied about my death, or construct even more elaborate lies. Either choice would cost him something significant: his credibility, his relationship with Victoria, his standing at the law firm that had elevated him based on a character assessment built on fiction. I started my car and pulled slowly out of the parking lot. In my rearview mirror, I could see the scene continuing to unfold. Guests streaming toward their cars. The wedding coordinator standing alone near the arbor. Samuel still talking with Judge Ashford, his gestures growing more desperate. The ghost he had tried to create had spoken from beyond the grave he dug, and the message was devastatingly simple: I'm still here. I exist. And lies, no matter how carefully constructed or widely believed, eventually collide with truth in ways that cannot be managed or controlled. I drove back toward the city, taking the scenic route through neighborhoods where families were having normal Saturday afternoons. Children playing, people washing cars, couples walking dogs. Regular life continuing for people whose worlds hadn't just collapsed under the weight of fundamental deception. My phone stayed off in my purse. I didn't need to hear Samuel's explanations. I didn't need to witness the aftermath directly. I had done what I came to do, which was not to destroy him, but simply to stop being dead. to exist loudly enough in the right spaces at the right time that his fiction could no longer hold. The revenge I needed was not violence or dramatic confrontation. It was just this: the truth, deployed precisely, allowed to spread through his world like cracks in ice. What happened next was not my concern. I had served my final notice. The waitress he dismissed as beneath his ambition had proven capable of serving him one last thing he could not send back or ignore. I was alive, inconvenient, unmarketable, completely real. And that, finally, was enough. I drove home through the Saturday afternoon traffic. My hands were steady, my breathing calm. No rush of adrenaline, no triumphant feeling. Just a quiet sense of completion, like closing a book after reading the last page. When I reached my studio apartment, I climbed the narrow stairs and unlocked the door to find everything exactly as I had left it. My reading chair, the plants catching the afternoon light, my small table with its folded napkin, my space, my sanctuary, untouched by the chaos I had created 30 miles away. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the street below. The world kept turning, indifferent to the small earthquake I had triggered in Samuel Thornton's reality. My phone stayed off for the rest of the weekend. I didn't need to know what happened. Truth, once released, has its own momentum. Sunday, I worked my regular shift at Riverside Diner. Maria raised an eyebrow when I walked in, studying my face. "You look different," she said. "Something happened?" "I took care of something I needed to handle," I replied, filling the industrial coffee maker. "That's all." She nodded slowly, asking nothing more, understanding in the way that good friends do. We worked in comfortable rhythm, refilling cups and clearing plates. On Monday morning, I finally turned my phone back on. 17 missed calls from Samuel. A dozen texts, progressing from confused to angry to pleading. 3 voicemails I deleted without listening. I blocked his number and went about my day as though nothing unusual had occurred. Because in the architecture of my life, nothing had changed, except the weight I no longer carried. Tuesday afternoon, Emma called. "So, I heard some interesting gossip," she said without preamble, "about a certain wedding that apparently went sideways this weekend." "Did it now?" I said, moving cans of tomato sauce to a higher shelf. "My friend Jennifer works as a paralegal at Whitman and Cross. She was invited to the Thornton-Ashford wedding. She said it was the most awkward ceremony she has ever attended." I said nothing, just kept organizing cans. "Apparently, it was delayed by almost half an hour because the groom was getting calls and messages about his dead wife, who turned out to be not so dead after all." Jennifer said Victoria was in tears. The judge looked ready to call the whole thing off, and half the guests were on their phones trying to figure out what was happening. The ceremony eventually went forward, but Jennifer says the reception was tense. Like everyone was pretending everything was fine while clearly nothing was fine. And now people are talking. Law firms love gossip, and a story about someone faking a spouse's death for sympathy? That's exactly the kind of thing that spreads. Emma paused. I could hear the question she wasn't quite asking. "I appreciate you letting me know," I said, "but I'm not really interested in following up on any of it. What happens in Samuel's world is not my concern anymore." "Fair enough," Emma said. "I just thought you should know that whatever you did, it worked. People are asking questions he can't answer well." After we hung up, I finished organizing the closet. Samuel's world was cracking in the ways I knew it would. What happened next was between him and the people he had deceived, none of whom were my responsibility to protect or inform. The weeks that followed fell into the familiar patterns of my rebuilt life. Morning shifts at the diner, afternoon walks, evening hours in my apartment, reading or cooking simple meals. I had returned to the rhythm that sustained me. 3 days after the wedding, Emma forwarded me a screenshot from social media. It showed Samuel and Victoria at their reception, smiling for the camera. But even through the filtered photo, something looked wrong. The smiles were too tight. Victoria's eyes held no warmth. Samuel's hand on her waist looked more like obligation than affection. The post, shared by one of Victoria's cousins, asked, "Why would someone lie about a spouse dying? What does that say about their character and integrity?" The comments were divided. Some defended Samuel, suggesting he was the victim of a malicious prank. Others expressed doubt about his honesty. A few pointed out that multiple sources had received calls from his supposedly dead wife. I saved the screenshot. The mythology Samuel had built was developing cracks, and sunlight was getting into the fissures. What grew in those cracks was not my concern. The months that followed brought changes to my own life that had nothing to do with Samuel. In February, Frank, my boss, called me into his office. He offered me a promotion to assistant manager, increased responsibility, better pay, and regular hours that would allow me to have actual weekends off for the first time in years. "You've earned this," Frank said. "You show up, you work hard, you treat people with respect. That matters more than fancy credentials." Maria organized a small celebration. Devin made a card. These people had become my family. They saw me for who I actually was and valued that person. The promotion felt more meaningful than any of Samuel's polished achievements because it was built on reality, not fiction. I wouldn't be featured in alumni magazines, but I had earned genuine respect from people whose opinions I actually valued. 6 months later, Emma mentioned over coffee that Jennifer had heard updates about Samuel. "Victoria's parents hired someone to investigate after the wedding disruptions," Emma said. "They found out the truth about you, about how Samuel had been telling people you died when you were very much alive and paying half his rent." I sipped my coffee. The marriage went forward because calling it off would have been too embarrassing for everyone involved. But Jennifer says everyone knows it's strained. Victoria apparently feels betrayed on a fundamental level. "That sounds difficult for her," I said, and I meant it. Victoria had been a victim too. Also Morrison and Wells apparently had some serious conversations about Samuel's character. They didn't fire him, but they're not fast-tracking him anymore either. The sympathetic widower narrative that helped him get hired has been replaced by questions about his integrity. "Does that feel satisfying?" Emma asked, watching my face. "It feels complete," I said finally. "I didn't do this to punish him. I did it to stop being dead, to exist loudly enough that his fiction could not hold. What happens to him now is between him and the people he deceived. I'm just living my life." Emma nodded. We talked about other things, normal things. I walked home through streets where spring was beginning to assert itself. New leaves, flowers pushing through soil, the world renewing itself. I climbed the stairs to my studio apartment, unlocked the door, and stepped into the space that was entirely and authentically mine. The truth had done its work. Samuel's carefully polished facade had developed cracks that would never fully repair. And I had stopped being the ghost he tried to create, reclaiming my existence through the simple act of refusing to stay buried in the grave he dug with lies. That was enough. That was everything. The calendar notification appeared on my phone in late October, a full year after Samuel had told me not to come to his graduation. The reminder read simply anniversary because I'd never bothered to delete it. 6 years since we stood in that courthouse. I stared at the notification for a long moment, then dismissed it. But the date lingered throughout my shift at the diner, a marker of how far I had come. After work, I did something I had never done before. I made a reservation at Marcellus, an Italian restaurant downtown I'd walked past countless times but never entered. The prices on the menu board were more than I typically spend on groceries for a week. But I had received my first paycheck as assistant manager, and I decided this anniversary deserved acknowledgement. Not as mourning for what was lost, but as a celebration for what I had survived and rebuilt. The hostess seated me at a table by the window. I felt briefly self-conscious sitting alone, but I pushed the feeling aside. This evening was mine, earned through resilience and the quiet work of rebuilding a life. I ordered wine that cost more per glass than Samuel, and I used to spend on entire bottles. The first sip was rich and complex. This was what quality tasted like, when you could finally afford it through your own honest work. The server brought the chef's special, a beautiful pasta dish. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, feeling completely whole in a way I had never felt, even during the year Samuel and I were married. No one across from me making dismissive comments. No one measuring my worth against people from better families. No one treating my presence as something to be hidden. Just me, alone at a table by the window, present in my own life without apology or shame. Between courses, I watched the city lights come on. I thought about Samuel, probably sitting down to dinner with Victoria in some equally nice restaurant. I wondered if he ever thought about this anniversary. But those thoughts came without the sharp edge of pain they once carried. Samuel's life was his own now, contaminated by lies. Whatever difficulties he faced were consequences of his own choices, and I had no obligation to care. The server brought dessert, a small masterpiece of chocolate and cream. I savored it slowly, finishing my wine, feeling grateful for this moment, this meal, this life I had built from the ruins. Understanding settled over me. Being erased from someone's story doesn't mean you cease to exist. It only means you exist outside the boundaries of their narrative, free to write your own story using your own words and your own truth. Samuel had tried to make me invisible, but erasure only works if you cooperate with it, if you accept the judgment that you are not worth remembering. I had refused to cooperate, not through dramatic confrontation, but through the simple act of existing loudly enough in the right places at the right time. The waitress he dismissed as beneath his notice had proven capable of serving him one final order he could not decline or send back to the kitchen. Truth, delivered with precision. I paid the check and left a generous tip. As I gathered my coat and purse, I caught my reflection in the darkened window glass. The woman looking back at me was not the person I had been a year ago, broken and confused. She was not even the person I had been 3 years ago, shrinking herself to fit inside Samuel's ambitions. This woman was Haley Brennan, assistant manager at Riverside Diner, holder of modest achievements earned through honest work, survivor of betrayal, who had learned that being dismissed is not the same as being dismissible. I had scars from this experience, places where trust had broken and might never fully heal. But I also had clarity about my worth that came from being valued by good people who measured character through actions, rather than credentials or connections. The studio apartment above the bookstore waited for me. I climbed the stairs and unlocked the door to the space that was entirely mine, furnished with pieces I had chosen and paid for myself. The reading chair, the small table, the plants on the windowsill. Everything in this apartment carried meaning, rather than serving as props in someone else's curated life. This was not performance. This was just living. Honest. Modest. Completely real. The life I had built was not glamorous by Samuel's standards. I would never be featured in alumni magazines. But it was solid in ways that fiction could never be. Built on authenticity. I made tea and sat in my reading chair by the window. Samuel had tried to write me out of his story, to erase me so completely that I became nothing more than a tragic footnote. But stories have a way of asserting their own logic. His story would always be contaminated by the lie at its center. My story was different. It was clean, built on survival and the quiet power of continuing to exist despite someone else's determination to erase me. It was not a story people would tell at networking events. It was just mine. Honest. Hard-won. Sufficient. I raised my teacup toward my reflection in the dark window. A small toast to the woman I had become. Not the ghost Samuel tried to create, but someone solid and present and whole. Someone who had learned that the best revenge is not destruction or punishment, but simply refusing to disappear. Simply continuing to exist with dignity and honesty while the lies collapse under their own weight. The ghost had learned to live again, not by haunting the person who tried to kill her off, but by claiming her own space in the world and refusing to be anything other than fully, completely, inconveniently alive. I finished my tea and set the cup down gently. Outside, the city continued its evening rhythms. And inside this modest apartment, I sat in my reading chair, feeling absolutely complete, defined not by someone else's shame or limited by someone else's ambitions, but by my own resilience and my own refusal to stay buried in a grave dug with lies. The anniversary had passed. The ghost had lived. And that, finally, was the entire story. If this story of truth serving justice had you hooked from start to finish, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was watching Samuel's face drain of color as his phone started ringing at the altar and his perfect facade began crumbling in real time. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more compelling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.